Welcome, everyone, to another installment of the Great Minds series. Today, we are diving into a fascinating dialogue that lies at the crossroad of neuroscience and philosophy, guided by two remarkable thinkers who seamlessly bridge this diverse field. We're honored to have Dr. Alex Gomez-Marin with us, a physicist turned neuroscientist who explore the edges of consciousness. His research spans the neurobiology of various organisms, and he currently leads the Behaviour of Organisms Lab at the Neuroscience Institute in Alicante. Alex challenges conventional ideas about the mind, offering fresh perspective on consciousness. Joining him is Andrea Hiott, a philosopher, neuroscientist, and author with a diverse background in philosophy, neuroscience, and technology study, currently pursuing her doctoral degree at the University of Heidelberg. She's explored phenomenology and psychiatry, focusing on concepts like way-making, ecological memory. Her works offer deep insight into how we navigate and make sense of the world around us. Today, we are here to explore where these two perspectives meet and diverge, how my Alex work on extra-ocular lesions interact with Andrea's focus on embodied cognitions. By bringing these two ideas together, we hope to uncover fresh insight into consciousness and how we perceive the world.
Andrea and I haven't met, so it's nice to meet you,
Yeah, it's
Andrea.
kind of funny. Hi, Alex.
I have already a question for you, Andrea, and maybe you can help me with this to jump straight into it. I had an enactivist crisis. See, I used to be an enactivist. I've been many isms, many ists in the past. And when I transitioned from theoretical physics to neurobiology, studying the fruit fly larva, I was lucky, I think, to naturally have a cybernetic approach to the animal. So I was wondering, well, this kind of stimulus response paradigm doesn't make a lot of sense. Of course, the animal, if you just look at it, you can see what you can try to think and see the world through the eyes of the maggot. That was the larva, and I actually had dreams when I was doing my postdoc that I was a larva. That was weird. Anyways, long story short.
Wow, I'd like to know what that was, what feeling like, the embodied experience.
Well, yeah, I really, because I was coding a lot of abstractions and you know, but also like really, if I was the animal, I would stop. I would head cast left and right. Okay, so then I discovered there was cybernetics that I didn't study in physics, and then I discovered that you can improve that through the 4E cognition world, and I studied them. But at some point, maybe when I became interested in consciousness later on, not just behavior or cognition, I started to become disillusioned with enactivism. I can say more, but where are you with let me say why. Yes, all this reciprocal, like the absolute importance of the interaction between the organism and the environment, the loops, all good, the body, yes, but it's a kind of physicalism. And activism often sounds like, well, we don't know what mind is. It's kind of in the loop. So at the end of the day, it doesn't do it for me. So perhaps you can help heal my enactivist crisis.
Okay, this is great. Do you think I'm an enactivist?
No, but since you've explored neuroscience and philosophy of mind as well, I was wondering, what's your take on enactivism? I'm not saying you are, but maybe you can.
No, I mean, it's interesting if
you
might think I am. Yeah, because I do talk to a lot of people who are interested in that, and in the degree that I went back to, I'm with kind of a group that's associated sometimes with enactivism. So I understand why you would say that, but actually I've had a similar crisis to you in a way.
All right.
Yeah. So, and also I kind of found enactivism through also systems thinking and more of the cybernetics. I was probably more interested in like Gregory Bateson, and that's sort of led me into cybernetics. And then you kind of you find Varela, and then I sort of found enactivism that way. And I love the idea of the coupling with the environment and getting out of the head, really trying to imagine cognition in a different way. And so I was also like quite, I don't know, not in love with it, but I thought, wow, this is something so alive. And it felt, I love phenomenology too, even though I wouldn't say I'm a phenomenologist, but I'm also in that kind of crowd too. So people often assume I'm either a phenomenologist or I'm an enactivist, and I'm not either. But I love writings, and I've been inspired by both in ways that maybe you have too. Actually, I'm actually very close to, I think Whitehead and Bergson are close to you, and those were the people I read first, especially Bergson, like when I was a teenager. I still have the books from, Creative Evolution and Matter and Memory and stuff. So I think for me, Enactivism was and still is inspiring in the sense that you don't have to think about the brain as a computer. Now, I mean, I love computers. I love technology. I'm very interested in all of that. But I also really love delving into the work of, for example, Evan Thompson or someone like that, who's very much looking at the nuance of things. I think for me, like the thing I've kind of come to is this idea of trying to hold the paradox or hold the dichotomy of what one might associate with enactivism and what one might associate with something like functionalism, or, all these isms. I mean, we can go on and on. I don't know how much the audience cares about all of these specific terms, but let's just say like one where you're trying to think of cognition more as like mechanical and in the brain, and the other where you're maybe trying to understand cognition as some sort of coupling that you can't dissociate from a body and environments. Like, that's a very cartoon example, but my first inclination coming out of my childhood would be towards that second one, then an activist. And probably I come off in that way, and the phenomenologist in the way that I talk. But I actually do respect this other tradition a lot too. And for me, it's about trying to hold both of them, which is actually kind of why I'm drawn to what you're doing in a way. And so I can't argue an activism for you and try to like solve what your crisis was. I'd be interested to know what your crisis was, because for me, it's the same crisis that I've had with any ism, which is that you have to become part of a certain kind of tribe or group, and you have to reference only those things. And what I think of as you become part of a sort of a trajectory that then you have to kind of defend. And it's one reason I've always been at the edges of everything, academia wise, and doing a million things at once, because the edges are where I feel alive. And the problem I had with enactivism was I needed to become someone who cites certain people in a certain way and talks in a certain way. Not that anyone's telling you have to do that. It's not that someone said I have to do that, but there's a weird pressure that I felt. I don't know if you felt it. And I always resist that.
Yes. No, you make me understand another side of the word edge, which I use a lot, because when I express what I do as studying the edges of consciousness, I say it's edges in a double sense, because it's marginalized, and we can and should talk about the social politics of knowledge, but also edge because I think it's frontier. It's like we don't know, but maybe there's a third sense in which we can talk about the edge, which is, well, it's not being on the fence. It's not taking sides, but it's this idea that if I stay too long here, I will become a devotee of whatever system of thought, and I want to resist this. So you're saying you're trying to hold on to functionalism and enactivism. I'm trying to get rid of both, but perhaps it's the same thing. And I have a similar crisis, let's put it this way. Maybe I don't know when I chose this way of expressing myself tonight, but with phenomenology, when I discovered true phenomenology, the Husserls of the world, and of course Bergson is my idol, and he is a phenomenologist, but also the later ones, and Michel Bitbol, who's alive, this amazing thinker. And I asked him once, we need phenomenology, of course, because if we forget what's immediate and we treat abstractions as if they were the concrete stuff of the world, then we're doomed. But I asked him, it seems to me that phenomenology has failed. The project of phenomenology has failed. And he kind of agreed. And it's like, oh, shit, right? Because we need it so badly in general, right? To recover what we've been doing in science for the last 400 years, but especially when studying consciousness. It's like the ultimate. It's like Jim Carrey in Truman Show, when it's on the boat and then it's swimming and it arrives and there's the dome and it's painted. It's like when you're studying consciousness, it's like you're hitting your head on that dome, and then you need phenomenology. And at the same time, there's something about phenomenology that doesn't quite get it, right? So, well, these are cracks.
But I don't think it can fail as a lived experience. At least it can fail as like a paradigm that someone set up, or a framework that someone's kind of tried to write rules down. But as lived experience, if we just think of phenomenology in a like most basic sense, I don't think it fails. But I think what happens is that what we're doing now already is very hard, right? Because we're using language and we're trying to fit all of these things into what seem like categories that have to be either or this way or that way. And I think what a lot of us are trying to do in a lot of fields is break out of that, but the language and everything still forces us into it. But lived experience, we all have lived experience from a body and from a perspective, and I don't think that fails. But also, I think it becomes very hard when you want to do something scientific or even philosophic,
Yes.
and you have to follow these things, because then you need some protocols and structure and so on. But what I was saying was, I don't want to reject all of these, but I also don't want to accept all of these, because I want to find a way for it to be about the situation. This gets into cybernetics and systems thinking and things like this, right? And edge work in another sense, which would be the sense of like nodes and edges, in complex systems. And also something in another area of my life that I think about a lot is edge work. This idea that Hunter S. Thompson, I think, coined, but, in life, when you're kind of pushing yourself to the edges, when you're climbing a mountain or something, you're sort of doing edge work. So, but I think when you're doing that kind of work, and when you're also trying to be in some kind of structured environment, you do tend to need to choose a side. But maybe, can we possibly hold all of that together, and in each moment, according to each situation, if we've understood the history and perspective of that, could these be different ways or that might be helpful and that have to be justified, but not in some overarching way where we say, okay, I am an activist and that's always going to apply to every situation. That doesn't make sense to me for lived experience anymore.
Yeah. I see that. About phenomenology, I meant it has failed in the sense that when you try to push it as a practice in science, as a scientist, at some point it seems to push you into becoming a mystic, and I'm fine with that. But it's like, as I use this metaphor, it's in between two floors. It's like phenomenology is like this button in the elevator, and you press it and you're in between the first and the second floor. You see a little bit of, like, as a philosopher, you see the science, and as a scientist, you sound like a philosopher. But that's what I meant. But it's so interesting you say about holding these different isms, because I've made my list, and some, maybe Monday and Wednesday, I'm more of an idealist, but some days I indulge myself into being a physicalist, despite how much I bang on these guys, the colleagues of mine, and dual aspect monism perhaps on Fridays, and pan-experientialism because I'm a Whiteheadian, although it's hard to understand. So yes, all of those things, and probably none at the same time, which sounds ambivalent, even dilettante, but no, I think there can be a healthy way of just being there at the edge.
Yeah, and if you hold yourself accountable, it's actually a much harder way to go, in a sense. And it's why maybe we don't do it in academia, because how can you know all of this, right? How can you hold all of this stuff at once? It's better to specialize and have your team. But I just don't think it doesn't work for me anymore. It never worked for me, I think. And I think it's also kind of pushed us into a lot of boxes that have caused a lot of unnecessary trouble, not only in academia, but just in kind of normal life when it comes to the way we think of spirituality and science, or the way we think of politics, or, all of this. And so for me, it feels like it has like there's a real reason to try to think through this. But I do think you're probably right about phenomenology failing, but what hasn't failed, Can you think of a philosophical framework that hasn't kind of failed in that sense at some point? Sometimes they go away and they come back. And I just really, I'm wondering, because I'm not sure that that's a kind of linear way of thinking about it, that I understand, that there's a start and a finish, and there's a winner and a loser. And I just wish that we could push out of that into some kind of nestedness or complexity where we understand at different moments in different lives those what philosophies or approaches have more or less resonance. I don't know what you think about that.
Well,
is it
another
too
way,
kind of wishy-washy?
No. And you'll need to apologize. Sorry, I need to apologize for all the metaphors I'll be using because I'll throw them constantly, but they just come into my mind like an image, like a vivid image. And I think of a garden, right? And all these views, all these systems are kind of the plants and even the insects you'd like to have on a garden. And probably they all have a place. It's kind of an ecological way of thinking about thinking. But when I get pissed off and react strongly is where we're forced to having a monoculture, right? And that's why I've lost my patience with functionalism and with physicalism. It's like, sure, it has a place, but not the entire field forever, right? It's like, please. And so we need to cultivate in this double sense also these other ways of thinking. And that's, look, I don't know your experience, but universities are not the place to do that anymore. It's over. They are crumbling. It's a farce. It's about overheads. It's about, you see, we need to talk about that because it's what's going on. It's not just the epistemology and the metaphysics and so on.
No, all this is connected. You're right to bring it in. Yeah.
Even when you let's sound a bit academic here, even when you submit a paper, like I'm a theoretical physicist and I used to live out of these two items, right? A pen and a paper. But now when I dove into neurobiology, it was all about big fancy technology and lots of people in labs, right? Doing bench work. Now, like when I write pieces that are conceptual, and that's how I like to frame them, conceptual, they say, well, what are the new results? Where's the data? As if the game was mostly about fancy new tool, gathering new data, and just winning at the statistics and proposing a new mechanism, right? So although I'm happy and lucky to be in a university and to have this freedom, it's really bad and it's really sad. And some of the great people you and I admire, Ian McGilchrist being one of them, they are so great because they are unique people, because they were brave, and because they went through the tour. So I'm not sure about the future of university. That's really a box. This is really a rat box.
It's so painful, honestly, because there's so many good people who go in to universities with really idealistic, beautiful ideas about all of these things that matter so much in our everyday life, whether it's like trying to deal with mental illness or whether it's just really understanding why we're here and what we're doing in the world and what love is and how to have more of it. But then you get in the university and you can't really ask those questions. I mean, you sound kind of crazy, even if you're in a philosophy department. You have to structure them in these certain ways, and you have to, get grants and money and fit into certain ways. But what you're saying is, I mean, is it really like a crisis? Like, do you really think, because I have had a lot of experience with this too, trying to stay outside at the edge of universities for the very reason that I can't live like that. I just I've never been able to, I'm not alive. I'm more alive at the edges, right? Which for me is actually real life. But universities don't really like that. But I don't know, have they ever? I mean, when I think of a lot of people that I really admire and even like physicists and so on, they're kind of doing a lot of edge work too. Sometimes they find a way to get tenure or do this or that, and then they kind of do their edge work, or, they're finding ways to do what they have to do that edge work. But it's not that the university was like the most welcoming place for it until they win some prize or they die and become a legend, and then it's, oh yeah, we're going to name the building after you. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think it's changed? Like, is it really even worse now?
Well, I'm not versed in the history of universities, but I have also my heroes from 100 years ago and what was happening in physics, right? And I see how universities work, and I'm, again, I spend a lot of time in the Citadel, right? I commute. at night through back doors, and I do. But really, if they knew, I do a lot of outreach. I don't like to call it outreach. I don't know exactly what that is, but it's like, as a scientist, as an expert in this and that, I go and tell the people, don't trust the experts. And also I tell them what's going on the backstage. That's another metaphor. Apologies. Like, if I used to play in a rock band, and you can see people at the front, and everything sounds great and the light is perfect at you and so on. But it's like, no, wait. You'll come 4 hours before the gig, and you'll see, we need to bring the instruments, and we do the sound check, and you'll see what happens at the backstage. I think people need to know what happens at the backstage of science and universities. And, well, I don't want to moan too much, but yeah, I'm pissed off. Like, I have 2 daughters. They're 5 and 8. They go to a regular school. It's a good school. Like, schools are not teaching anymore. It's incredible. Like, they come back, and I need to do basic maths and reading with them. Come on. Like, I go to the supermarket, and it doesn't matter how many stickers of bio they stick. That food is mostly not food, right? So it's like supermarkets don't sell food anymore. Schools don't teach anymore. Universities don't produce or keep knowledge anymore, and so on. I mean, forget about politics. So it's like, what is going on, right? What's this craziness? What is unmaking, to borrow Ian's subtitle, right? What is this unmaking of the world that we are contributing passively or actively? And one more thing, you're mentioning students. When students come to the masters here of neuroscience, it doesn't matter what subject I teach, and it doesn't matter if it's not the first one or the first day, but I say, what was the promise? Why did you come here? What has been sold to you and they say what you're alluding to, like, well, perhaps I'll be able to heal some mental disease at some point, or understand this mystery that's the mind. But after a year, and I see them, because then they start their PhDs. After a year, they're already setting up like bullshit committee meetings, like just imitating their academic parents, if you wish, right? They have all these meetings, and they're not reading. Forget philosophy. It's like, and again, I sound like an old man saying all these new generations, but no, they are castrated very early on.
That's a very strong thing, but I do know what you mean. And to try to relate it back to what we were talking about before, and the consciousness and like a bigger picture, I wonder if some of this isn't that mechanization or what bothers you about, for example, functionalism, or that we've gotten into thinking everything is a machine and it happens in a certain way, and education too, and there's no place really for what I think turns everyone on in life, which is the stuff that we still associate with so-called idealism, or the things we go to school to, turned on about. And then we get, what is it? Do we get afraid that we're not going to have a future? And so we have to fit everything. Like we start kind of creating these machines. I don't know. I wonder if it's related to this overall kind of prevailing view that, people think philosophy and science are important in terms of the kind of overall knowledge paradigms they set. But I do think it kind of gets into society, doesn't it? Like over time. And now we're kind of working like a machine. Is that the kind of life we want to have? Like, do you want your daughters to grow up and program their life and like have a successful machine-like life? I don't know. It's to think about phenomenology and what we were talking about at the beginning of being an embodied person coupling with the world. That feels really far away from what you just described. I don't know what you think, but
we're all vulnerable and finite, because I sometimes, just thinking about my daughters, I think, fuck it, I'll homeschool them. But then it's like, no, I won't. It's
how can you?
Because it's really difficult. It's exhausting, and it's like, so. And we need to cope with what we have, right? So I'm not saying I'm the virtuous man and the rest is it's crap. But yeah, there are also like beautiful things going on again at the edges or the interstices. And you were talking about what turns people on. And since I started talking about the edges of consciousness, like near-death experiences. I mean, I hope this is not what podcasters call audience capture, like your audience likes more of that and you tell them, it's like very cybernetic, by the way, you tell them more and then at the end of the day, but this turns people on and off, like these very strong energies or impulses of eros and thanatos, right? Like love and death. And people want to know about that. It's like, sure, they want the guy talking about the new boson discovered. Like, did you know, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of, self-secure, arrogant man speaking like this, or the guy that tells them, like, did you know that in this part of the brain is where the memory of chocolate is stored? Like, but really, what people want to know is very humanistic. It's like, what happens when I die, or where is my partner that's already gone, or these kind of things that they have weird experiences.
This is real life.
This is real life, and real life is often presented as kind of anecdotic to the topics of fields of study. When you submit a grant and you need to go through that coding system, it makes sense bureaucratically to know where to send it. It's like, I never find my code anymore, and it's like, people don't give a shit about this code. It's like, people want to know things that matter, right? And I think the science should be about the things that matter, and philosophy too, and it's not anymore.
I don't want to interrupt
but some people are doing it. No,
you made me think of something. I have to say it, because I almost think that the podcasts are turning into the university.
Totally.
And YouTube is becoming the place people go for what you want to get out of university. So it's weird, right? That, I don't know, if something is happening a bit, maybe that it speaks to what you were saying about this. Something is transitioning, because this is life and we want to understand it, and we want to like expand and grow, and education, university, it all comes out of that desire. And if you're not getting it in these institutions anymore, and they've become like businesses, people are getting it from YouTube. And I think there's a real revolution going on with that.
Yeah. I have a piece coming out next week. It's a hard article. The editor, I think, will let it go through. And in it, I speak about outreach, in-reach, and pre-reach, which is just a way to summarize the kind of the outreach. It's not through Richard Dawkins on BBC anymore. Thank God. It's like these thousands of podcasters, like, that think through and have amazing guests and so on. This is the outreach.
Like Ivy.
Yeah. the in-reach, but so podcasts are, I think, are keeping afloat the hope of the outreach. The in-reach, we're still operating on the peer-reviewed kind of, but that's, we had the preprint, but still the business is very entangled. It's really hard to get out of that in the inside. And then the pre-reach is education. It's a way of saying, it doesn't matter if we fight the Ponzi scheme of journals, or legacy, kind of the legacy science communication. Kids are still taught 19th century understanding of the world in textbooks, right? So, but things are changing on all fronts, and that's really good, I think.
Yeah, I wonder about your experience with this, because me thinking about, I feel very passionate about this, like being part of a new way of understanding the world that's nested and that's beyond these dichotomies that we just assume have to structure everything that's part of our language and so on. And you're, from my perspective, you seem to be trying to do that. And I don't mean that you're riding the fence, because I don't think that describes it properly. I think you're opening to a lot of things that are dangerous or edgy, in a way that's very structured and scientific, and like you're doing both at once. But I can imagine that's incredibly alienating in both communities at different times. And you're also, you're also in the YouTube world and the university world, and like this. I wonder what that's like from your perspective, because it could be quite a challenge. You have to be a lot of different people and still be one person.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying this. Yeah, I suffer a lot from imposter syndrome, and that's why I say it. I say it in podcasts. So it's like kind of part of the therapy. It's like that's truly nested. It's like it's
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
draws effect. Like me talking about imposter syndrome and kind of being an imposter
It's the
talking
best way to
about
get
it.
over imposter syndrome, is to say you have
Yes,
it.
yes, and all these masks that I talk about, because I'm a physicist, but come on, I finished my PhD 20 years ago. I should renew my physics license. It's like, am I really a physicist? No, but that my degree says that. A neuroscientist, yes, but I don't care so much about the brain, right? And I've been saying this silently. I care about the mind because that was the promise. I enjoy talking, as you may have noticed, and so yeah, this world is also sucking me, like the world of just sitting down and talking to people. And it's very true, this point you make about maybe not satisfying anyone at the end of the day, because when I came out of the closet, let's say 3 years ago, it's a process, but I had this image of I'm leaving the citadel, and I turn around, and that's the big walls. It's like, well, I'm with my backpack. It's like, well, let's see what I find. And then I find these nomad communities, and they're like, welcome, welcome, welcome. But then very soon you discover that if you say, well, look, I wonder what's what's over there in that other mountain, they say, like, why? Just stay with us. It's like, no, I don't want to repeat that thing here, just in a smaller scale. So
Yeah.
lately, and this is really in progress, and in the sense that I haven't talked about it yet, but promissory materialism, and how enjoyable it is to beat that dead horse, promissory materialism. But I've started to think about promissory spiritualism.
No.
Because yes, open-minded and near-death experiences, and the conscious carries on, and I kind of believe in all of that. But when people start, of course, it's kind of the quantum healing of the consciousness collapse, and it's like, wait. Some of those things, people are doing it very technically and very grounded in it, but not anything goes. Although I love the work of Paul Feyerabend, anything goes still makes me feel a bit weird, right? So it's another
It's
way of
also not
describing it.
reality. I mean, it's not, anything doesn't go. It's not, that's also just not right. I mean,
But the anarchist idea, which is a word that has been used so that it loses its glow, but the idea that just everybody could just feel free to try your own way, but
that can be
funambulist,
true without anything goes being true. I think, like in a sort of Guy Debordyan situationalist kind of sense, or maybe some other anarchist sense. I mean, anything goes means something different than everyone can have their own perspective in, and that perspective should be respected. Yeah.
Yes. No, I see what you mean. Yes. I'm not giving up truth that easily. No. But science looks to me, and again, another image, because I should be sleeping. That's my nighttime. Maybe it's because I'm dreaming awake.
Yeah. It's late for us.
It's a circus. It's a circus. Like, some people are walking on a tightrope, and it's like, I feel often I'm walking on a tightrope, a little bit to the left, yeah, but not so much, a little bit to the right. And then sometimes I'm dressed as a clown, because humor is very important to be able to talk to the emperor and not have your head shut off that quickly, right?
You have to learn how to perform. That's true. It's a performance in a way, I guess.
There's a performance aspect to this, yes.
Promissory spiritualism. Could you go more into that?
Yes, okay, I'll be specific. And I never want to piss off people, but I do say what I think. My wife says, you should say what you think, but not everything, Alex. It's like, all right, yeah, you're right. Look, I had no, yeah, listen to them.
Yeah, listen to the woman.
And she would tell me, and don't say that I said that, and I just said it, right?
Oops.
Another nesting here. Look, a very specific one. So I had my near-death experience. It wasn't a spectacular one. It's like, no, I wasn't like super dead, and I wasn't like three months in heaven. But I saw the light and so on, and I reflected on it, and it really changed a lot of things in my life. And I tried. I mean, it's a long story. It's kind of the story for me. It's my long story.
Do you want to tell it? Because
I've done it, yeah, and it's
Or
a
have
brief.
you told it too many times?
No, but it's good. It's good, and it's brief. It's brief. It's not very spectacular. Like the Hollywood guys should put more fireworks into it. But I had a stomach leak. I didn't know what it was. I went to hospital. I was leaking slowly, like the bathtub has a leak. And if you fix it in 10 minutes, it's okay. But if it takes you 12 days, you're screwed. And so I lost a lot of blood, and I was fainting and flickering, and then in the end they found it and fixed it through surgery and so on. But in that process, yeah, I had incredible dreams with hybrid animals with fire in their heads, and I'm not the kind of person that dreams that or anything very spectacular. I always dream that I miss a plane. That's kind of how my
Dreamed about animals with fire on their head? That's such a cool image.
No, they were amazing, and they were hybrid, like a bear with the head of a giraffe and so on. And they were walking past by me, and they're bending their head and putting their fire on my head, which
they
later
bent their
on,
head and put their fire on your head?
Yeah.
That is really cool. Sorry,
that's
but
really
that's just
cool.
like very
That's
cool
really cool.
image.
And then they became flying carpets, colorful flying carpets, and then they got lost in the mountain. So I had this one, and then I had a few hours, minutes, I don't know, I had the near-death experience with the tunnel. It was a well. I was looking above, and there was this yellow light coming, and then there were 3 figures waiting for me. And I knew that if I kind of accepted their help, I would go, and I came back. That's it. Nothing more about it. But what I wanted to say is that then I discovered that, and probably I had heard of it, but anyways, that this is a large, well, not large, but it's a decent field of study with very knowledgeable guys who've been doing it for decades, and there are many cases. It's like not just some random thing that happened to me. All right. And so on the one hand of this tightrope or the edge of the mountain, because you speak about sports, yeah, you're running, you can fall on the left or on the right. On the one hand, there are my physicalist friends, like when the brain is off, no mind. That's it. Period. Nothing to see here. And even if you show, or people can show that there's no breathing, the heart has stopped, EEG's flat or kind of flat, they'll say, no, but there are kind of a dozen neurons down there, and they're all just firing like crazy. And it's like, okay. Now, what happens on the other side? Because these are the promissory materialists. They'll say, just give us more money and more time and more funding, and we'll figure it out. It's all going to be something in your brain. This and everything. But on the other side, and I have some of the books there, people say, this is kind of like the proof that heaven exists. And they speak as if, and I understand phenomenologically, you see, because they've experienced it, and it's so transformative. It's like I cannot doubt that. But then they transpose it into a kind of a scientific dogma in a way, and that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. It's like you don't need to tell people, again, in the name of science, that we now know ... that for sure there's nothing after, or for sure, I mean, just get ready, it's gonna feel great. I mean, really, do we know, right? So there's some uncertainty that I don't think should be collapsed, flattened, ironed. And so promissory spiritualism does that in the name of science again, right? So it's a kind of, and Bergson would write, when Bergson writes these long paragraphs, when he said, well, for instance, in creative evolution, I think he says, well, the mechanists and the finalists, they seem to disagree a lot, but they all kind of concur in the same error here, and that's what they share. They think they're so different, but what they share is that. Well, I think promissory spiritualism shares that with promissory materialism, and it's a swing reaction to many years of just one way of doing things. But we should be careful. I'm retuning myself, right? Because people want hope. It's like you're not the new priest. You're not the new priest with an EEG, either flat or non-flat, telling them about the afterlife. Let's take it easy.
Well, again, for me, it's like trying to hold the paradox. When it comes to something like near-death experience, or they call it like E
And
or
the E?
something, right? I mean, there's even kind
Yeah,
of,
and
I mean, I don't know much about it, but there's a whole universe, right? Yeah, it gets really heated really fast, I imagine. And then, but to this phenomenological lived experience that you had of somehow then that opens to you because you start to understand, oh, I can see what people are sort of talking about. And it's just an experience, right? I think this happens at all levels of life in all different ways where we think things don't exist and we don't understand them. And then something happens and we realize, oh, there's all these other worlds. And it can be overwhelming because it's a lot to handle. And sometimes you just want it to be like, this is the easy answer. But when you brought up what Bergson, that part of Bergson, and even the idea of creative evolution, it's almost like a paradox in that book. By the way, a paradox, I think, is the state of life. I don't think it needs to be resolved. It's just, even the way he writes, is like a practice in holding all this stuff together. I wrote my thesis on Hegel and Bohm, and they do it too. Like the people that move me the most for the longest amount of time write in ways that express both sides without telling you both sides exactly in words. I think Bergson does that beautifully. But in any case, it reminds me of your writing too, because in this paper, which I looked at before we talked about Eyeless Sight, right? Did I say that wrong? Yeah. You have a phrase in there that's very similar to this about going beyond the brain, but back to the brain. I'm not sure how you say it. You say it in a better way.
Yeah,
yeah,
back to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we need both of those sides, right? The lived experience and the EEG, but we're stuck in this way where we think only one's going to have the answer. Like, what is that?
Yes, we've lost the awe, right? Because matter is amazing. Like even the idealists would concede that, right? So you see, being so close to the brain in terms of, being in a neuroscience place and all the talks are neuro, at some point one gets numb about, at least this happens to me, like, oh no, don't talk about another neural mechanism again. But the brain is truly amazing, right? The brain is truly amazing, but the question is amazing as to what, and that's where the filter thesis comes in. And then you say, wow, William James wrote about it 100 years ago, and 99.9% of my neuroscience friends, they may not even know that there's like another option, right? Another big option on the table, like the brain as a filter, as a permissive mechanism, if they want. I think mechanism is a really tricky word, but anyways, and then it's then for me it's like the brain as an idol first stage. Wow, yeah. Then something doesn't feel right here, and then I start to get numb about it and reactive. And then once you're able to put the brain in its right place, then the brain it glows again. It's like, wow, what a mystery. Like, this piece of matter is kind of the interface in some sense, like, wow. And so then we're back and it's integrated. But it takes some time.
I don't know about you, but have you in neuroscience labs, people kind of have these mystical experiences at times where, I mean, they're very grounded, right? It's just like maybe they're in the lab and they see something that happens that kind of confirms their theory, or some kind of cell is I don't know, something happens to where they feel like they're the only person who's ever seen that, maybe, right? Or they're the first person who's ever seen that, or these things happen in the lab where people feel kind of mystical, right? That, wow, exactly what you're saying. They notice again that this is incredible, right? That this brain and this body, and like we don't understand it, and then you get a little glimpse of it. And I think, people often say that's what keeps them going as scientists, those little moments, right? But why is it so hard? I mean, you've been in both worlds. Why is it so hard for us to hold those things together, that we're dealing with something that's incredibly mysterious, magnificent, right? A body and a brain, that life, consciousness, like this, why do we have to be ashamed that that's so incredible and be in awe and still be scientists? Like, are we afraid we're going to get carried away and like lose our sanity, go off the edge? What is this pseudoscience worry, you know? Like,
Yeah.
because it's a real thing, right? You must feel it, that you
Yeah.
can go too far and you've gotten lost or something.
The way you put it is perhaps too romanticized for my taste, because I'm more cynical. But I don't want to be cynical, because cynical doesn't do you good.
That's probably good.
Well, no, but it's like what keeps people going, and that's how the professional science outreach would explain it. You know, like I was in the lab, it was raining, it was 2:30 in the morning, and then I saw in the oscilloscope.
I mean, there are reasons for cliches.
I'm saying I'm saying what keeps people going is to get the fucking next grant to survive, right? I once gave a talk, inspirational talk, for PhD students and postdocs online, and they loved it. And then I got this email, and this man was saying, "Wonderful, Alex, blah 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 blah. But at the end of the day, you need to get your next grant and move on." So it's like, wow, you see, the reality is we're in this kind of rat race, this bureaucratic system of incentives. And sure, scientists can sometimes have those moments. They're rare, and I think that they probably should be rare. But what keeps people going, look, let me make this analogy, because as you were saying this, I was thinking about family life and or being with your partner, and love. You know, what happens to love after weeks and years? And it's like it gets kind of, and you don't look at each other in the eyes. I mean, how many, I have a good friend, when I was, okay, this is at the tour, but when I had my first daughter, they hand it to you, and this is a weapon of mass destruction. This piece of flesh, this miraculous piece of flesh, is gonna destroy your fitness levels, the relationship with your partners, your sleeping habits, on and on and on and on and on. And so then what happens to, one doesn't even spend 10 seconds a day looking at each other's eyes, right? And so this friend of mine told me, when we were discussing parenthood, because men sometimes discuss those things, not just sports. And he said, look, we went to this therapist, and she said, just spend 10 seconds a day in front of your partner looking at each other. That's it, right? So, well, we lose that with routine, and science is another lie, another maybe decent lie they tell us. Is like, yeah, scientists are these people cruising into the unknown. And no, you finish university, and if you're kind of clever and you feel like kind of lazy about going into a bank, then you may enroll into a PhD, right? And then if you kind of make it, and then you go for a postdoc, and if it kind of works, maybe you go for another postdoc. And then if you're not already divorced or mentally ill, and these are serious things that happen, then you maybe start your lab, and it's a tremendous pressure. I mean, all jobs have pressure, but it's like there's this manufacturing process where you can still keep it, but they will prune out of you all that romantic love. And at the end of the day, what will survive is, grants and papers and shitty meetings and more meetings and committees, and much like in a normal relationship, where it's like, throwing the trash to the trash can. And it's like, so we need to rediscover the magic in it. And yeah, no, I sound like a self-help pseudo guru here.
No, you're right. You're right to bring that up, though, because the way I painted it, I mean, I have literally heard people tell those stories, but it is like once in a lifetime. And by keep us going, I guess I meant in this a little bit too idealistic sense of, okay, at the end of my life, I can feel like it was worth something, right? But you're right. The real kind of fuel and everyday what's keeping us going literally is that bureaucratic machine. And it is really deadening, and it is really hard to feel the love
Feel the love.
And yeah, I think it's actually a very good comparison that you made, the way little by little, slowly, day by day, just to get through the day and do our responsibilities, we kind of numb ourselves or we lose that. I fought against it. I mean, I'm not one to speak because I've literally lived my life sort of so I don't feel that way, because I would be one of the ones who got mentally ill or something, because I can't function like that. I knew it from like early on. But you do have to find very creative ways to survive.
Yes.
And you do have to deal with people not understanding what world you're in and stuff like that. And it's really hard.
Yeah, like,
I think not for me, but for academics,
it deserves a teacher, right? Like, ask your science, why are we together, right? It's like, yeah. And another thing, academics, and we know them, we're part of them. We are academics too. They're not so intelligent either. I mean, we should say that. I meet people.
That's the hard thing too as a student that you learn. And that's the weird thing that none of us talk about, which I'm really glad you brought that up, because you end up in that place that you dreamed of when you were a kid. You're in the lab in the best school with the best people, and it's really weird and hard because you realize they're just people. It's like that moment where you realize your parents are just your parents, or maybe you have to they're just human, and maybe you're even gonna have to take care of them, or maybe you know something more than they know, or I don't know, all that what you thought would be romance is suddenly just real. Which in the way you said, if we could really look at it, would be just as spectacular. But yeah, it's good you brought it up. Maybe you should say more about it, because I don't think that's something we face or talk about, but most of us feel it.
We are not either the kind of genius we think we're going to be, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Another
thing that happened to me, because I often pontificate about things in general, but when I started my lab, I very soon realized, if using another metaphor, that I was doing this because I like playing guitar, right? And all of a sudden, I wasn't practicing. It's like, I'm not spending time playing my guitar. I'm spending time thinking how I can buy new strings for the guitars of my students and so on, right? And then you feel like, oh, I'm a bad mentor, and I'm not a very good mentor, actually. That's why I stopped having students. It's like, this is another myth. Like, labs that are like 15 people. And I know, by the way, I know some heads that can do that. And I've been in some labs like this, and some people can do it. But this idea that more is better, right? More money, more grants, more overheads, more students, more papers, more space. It's like, stop it, right? So it was like a train for me. I went with it because I had to prove, and I started hiring people and this and that. And it's like, and at some point I said, no, I need to stop this train. I'm not playing my guitar anymore. I mean, why are we together? And this required sacrifice. And the pandemic helped me, because it was kind of an earthquake moment for everyone. The pandemic, I got tenure and my near-death experience. And I said, fuck it, I'm done. I retired at 40. I mean, meaning like, I will take this blessing, which is, in theory, intellectual freedom, and I'll exercise it. Because I felt that I was given like a ticket for 40 more years, right, of my life. And it's like, I almost died a few months after I got tenure. How pathetic we would have been, it's like now. But then how pathetic to just continue, milking the same cows, even if you don't want to do that. So it will come in different forms from everyone. If the brain is a filter, it's very hard to kind of work on it in a kind of erosion process slowly. That's kind of the yoga, right? Yoga is like every day, but the other option is kind of a sudden rupture, right? So in my case, the near-death experience was this kind of rupture, but not everybody needs to almost die. Like a divorce can be a near-death experience in a way, or like, unfortunately, traumatic events are the opportunities for the filter to break, and then more mind comes in, and then you can say, all right, what do I really want to do with this? And maybe steer the course a little bit I don't have a
Did you
self-help
ha-
book to
yeah.
sell, but call
No, you
112
don't.
and
I mean, you could write one. Yeah, maybe that's in the future. But see, I mean, this is also like can sound like a cliche, right? You have a kind of moment where everything has to change, or your death. You have to confront death, and then of course you look at what really matters, and so on. But I wonder if it wasn't a little gradual. I mean, were you thinking about a lot of this stuff? Because I mean, I guess we
Yes.
haven't said it yet, but this is when you started thinking about the Isle of Sight and all that, I guess, right? And you started really taking seriously things that you weren't supposed to take seriously as a scientist. But was that already part of you? I mean, were you already feeling a little bit of this questioning and stuff, and it just gave you the kind of clarity that, yeah, this is my
Yeah.
life and I'm going to do it? Okay.
Yeah, paraphrasing Ray Kurzweil expression, like longevity escape velocity, which
Ooh, I never heard
I
that.
call, yeah, that's what they use to sell you, pills that will make you be young forever. Well, maybe those experiences gave me the kind of escape velocity. But no, I was already on that path. And that's why I mentioned Enactivism and Phenomenology. I felt like I was kind of working with the traffic light in green, doing my calculations as a physicist, and then my Drosophila stuff, then more getting into heterodox land, because if you're an activist, the more the reductionist, mechanistic functionalists looked at you like, oh, poor guy, But anyway, they tolerate you because it's not heretic yet. It's heterodox. It's orange light. And so I was already in this course, but I didn't stop. And so then I went into red traffic light, with all those things that to many are impossible. And this is, by the way, this is some of the things that really, really excites me now. It's like trying to do a science that looks impossible and study phenomena that are impossible to many people. Well, actually, not to many people, to the loud voices, right, of the priestly caste. But yeah, and how are we going to? How is science going to survive the encounter? I'm a little bit of an iconoclast in that regard. Like, if a scientist tries to study those things, it's not what the scientist will achieve, but it's more like what would that object of study do on the scientist. It's like a mirror. It will just bounce back, and that's where kind of the science and the mystic in a way perhaps can cross paths, because the work you're doing, even though you may be wearing a white coat, it will impact on yourself. So that's very interesting. That's kind of why that's what keeps me going, as you were saying before, really. Like, wow, what's gonna happen in this encounter?
Yeah, and I think you're one of the first, maybe, or you're sort of stepping into a new area. So I think, I mean, not to make you a martyr or something, because you're not. I mean, you're in a really good position, and you have a lot going for you. So I'm not trying to say, but I think it must be kind of difficult. And so maybe it did take something really dramatic to help you understand that you can and want to do it. But I really think that, like, calling things out, like what we were just saying about, people are kind of hungry for this. I think, you might not think, but I think it's very hard to be pushed into these roles and habits in academia. And then you feel like, I mean, you said imposter syndrome earlier, and everyone's suffering from that, because exactly for that reason, you get into the place you've been always wanting to go, and it's not what you thought it was. And then you're like, how am I here? And then everyone sees you in a certain way. Oh, you're a neuroscientist with a lab, and you're understanding the brain. And then you start playing that role, even though we all know we don't know what the heck is going on. I mean, We really just don't. We know a lot. There's a lot of really good stuff going on. It's helping people. But at the same time, there's so much that no one knows. And you do all these experiments, you spend all this money, you write all these grants, and you almost have to kind of hypnotize yourself. And all this to say, I think people want someone to say what you're saying and to be able to talk about it. And like, it doesn't have to be either or. Like, either we do science, role playing, pretending like we're all geniuses, or we decide we gonna be like mystics. This is like the choice you have now.
Yeah.
This is
Yes.
crazy.
Yes. What's the expression in English? My way or the highway, right? Or you're
Yeah,
up or
you're
out.
with me or
Say,
you're not.
yes.
You're a scientist or you're doing stuff that's
Yeah,
just
I
like
sense
playing
people are
around.
hungry for that, but I don't know what they'll do after, because, well, we can say these things and they need to be said. But as we were talking a few minutes ago, then the alarm clock rings and you have animals to take care downstairs and life continues, you see. It's like, I'm going to go to the gym after Christmas.
Yeah, you have to pay the bills.
And then, but yeah, but maybe slowly. And by the way, I'm not a pioneer. I'm not a martyr, because I've met a lot of people who've been doing this for decades, right? Like Dean Radin and Rupert Sheldrake and Bruce Grayson and Jim Tucker. I mean, there are all these great scientists who've been studying this. I wasn't born and they were already publishing papers on this. And a lot of my work is also archaeological. It's just digging into old journals and trying to see what they were doing. And I have the luxury to be able to talk to them because they're still well and alive. But also I sense in them that they sense that, they're 70 and 80. So what's the new generation? Because having a school of thought is very important. That's also another socio-political aspect we don't talk too often. Like, if you have big money, then you have all these students and they will go to universities. And in a way, they copy and paste. There's like this meme, like this kind of lemming meme propagation, right? But if you don't have a school of thought, and many of them, they don't, then when it's like a religion of one member, right? when they die, it's over, right? And well, this is something that concerns me, how to contribute to create a kind of a fertile ground or a network where, because you need the community. I mean, I love to be alone in my cave thinking, but we need a community. We're social beings, and we need a community. And yeah, it's not really in place. You need to do a lot of contortion to find it and enjoy it. So that's another thing.
Yeah, what I find fascinating is listening to the two of you. It sounds a lot like indoctrination. If it's either an ism or a mystic, it's somewhat the same situation that mystics from religion were put in. And it sounds like a form of indoctrination to me, listening to the two of you.
I hope
You mean
I hope
we
you
sound
don't.
like
I hope you don't mean
we sound like we're indoctrinated?
No,
Or
you
the
are
university?
the free thinkers. You are the free thinkers. It just sounds like the system in which you're describing is almost indoctrinating people.
Well,
It
that's
is-
funny, the indoctrination and doctors, and I mean, there's something to that lineage of word choice that isn't consciously chosen by some kind of person trying to indoctrinate people. But
a doctrine shouldn't be something inherently negative, right? It's kind of a package. It's a package of tenets and beliefs and even maybe practices. Totally, it's not kind of. I think we are indoctrinated, and again, that wouldn't be dangerous if we could undo it, but we don't. Look, we were talking about isms. I feel recently, I feel like in a video game where there are all these isms as layers in an onion. Maybe I'm in this kind of starship and I'm inside the Death Star, and it's like I'm crossing kind of onion layers in space. And when I thought
you need the animals with flames on their heads to come in and help rescue you.
yeah, I'm riding on them. Yeah, I go like shoot. No, but you see, I thought okay, materialism. I mean, I will sound too self secure now, but it's like materialism. I got rid of that. Don't believe that shit anymore, and reductionism and all of that. No, okay. So I'm done with isms. No. Then I discovered recently there are many more. Two isms that I didn't know I was indoctrinated in, and I'm working hard to de-indoctrinate. Well, one it's easier than the other. The first one is secularism. It's like, they sell you these 3 for the price of 1 package. It's like, no, I only wanted shampoo, I only wanted shampoo. Why? Well, hair conditioning is important, and I've discovered this recently since the pandemic. But why dyeing my hair? I don't want the 3 for 1. I don't want red hair. I just want clean hair, right? So the 3 for the price of 1 was, materialism, reductionism, and mechanicism.
Yeah.
But then secularism, it's no, and no God talk at all, or anything that sounds spiritual, blah, blah, blah. And you can play with words, and, religion doesn't have the stocks are low, but spirituality in some places. Or if you say Catholicism, they hate it here in Spain. But if you say Buddhist, it's like, Buddhism is okay.
But that's new too. That's new too, that you can actually talk about Buddhism in academia, but not new. But
there's some very intelligent marketing strategies like contemplative sciences, and you see, good.
New, like decades old, but
yeah.
I just remember when I first tried to, I wanted to study Buddhism as part of philosophy, like 15 years ago, and there was absolutely no way to do that. You either did religion or you did philosophy.
I'm also cheeky here and provocative, because I'm kind of rediscovering my Christian roots, and again, it's like, wait a minute, you're a scientist. You see, again, I didn't buy the 3 times 1. It's like, if you say you pray, smells bad, but if you're meditating, all right, go ahead. It's like, so we need to kind of get out of all these closets, like closet inside closet and inside closet. So secularism is one. With the new atheism movement, that, the horsemen, luckily they're riding donkeys and they're kind of, falling off cliffs. So we don't have a lot of that anymore. And then another one is literalism. And I would really like to know what you think about this, Andrea, because we scientists often present things, and especially when it comes to anomalous experiences, as either fact or fiction, is a true alternative forced choice. It's a dilemma. A dilemma is always a trap. A dilemma is always a trap. And it's like either fact or fiction, right? Which means that things are either literally true or else what? And I see this very often when some of my colleagues say, no, we're taking all these experience. Alex, we take your near-death experience seriously. They use this adverb, but of course not literally. And then I wonder, well, then what do you take as literal then? A kind of a mechanism, like this kind of colorful drawing of a lock and a little ball that's getting in. And so I wonder if this is the kind of one of the ultimate isms that we are not aware of, like literalism, that precludes the world of imagination to be taken seriously, because it's either fact or fiction. So I'm recently thinking about this as a synapse, right? There's fact, there's fiction, and in between the synapse, I think it's the synapse of imagination. And a lot of what I say is like, I try not to be scientific about it, but very many times I'm too literal in my thinking yet. When it comes to the crazy shit I study, which includes, near death and precognitive dreams and even UAPs, like, how are we to think of this summer I met an 84-year-old woman who saw the Virgin Mary 80 times from the age of 7 to the age of 16. And she would be lifted in the air. And so what do I do with that experience? Where do I put it after I do my phenomenology with her? Fact or fiction?
Interesting. Yeah. You put that with the fact and fiction and the literalism, and also with this indoctrination, like all of this to me is connected. How do I kind of unwind it all? But again, it's that, like, we've been structured, and so therefore we assume we have to make a choice between these things, and that it's a linear world, and you only choose one thing at a time, and you choose one or the other. Like, we just assume this as a paradigm. Like, it's just in the way we talk, when in fact, in truth, and almost if you look at anything that's really kind of changed the world in any of these disciplines, it's all that stuff mixed up in a crazy way, right? Even like something like Einstein or Bohr, there's a lot of poetry and there's a lot of non-literal stuff in there that actually makes it work. And you can find quotes all over the place about people saying that, I mean, think about music or poetry, these things that express closer to whatever is this process that we can't express. We get closer to expressing it often in things that are not literal or that are poetic or narrative, because nothing can express it. That's the thing, right? We think science, we're going to make a model and it's going to exactly express an ongoing process, which is impossible. It's all models and measurements and assessments. But we think that we have to find one that's going to fit forever and to everything. And I just think that mindset is so hard to get out of, but it's what a lot of us are trying to do. And that synapse thing is very beautiful, because really it's the whole synapse. It's the electrical activity of what's happening at the synapse, but it's all that stuff, right? It's that ongoing process. And sometimes it's good to look at it through the literal lens, and sometimes it's good to look through it through the other lens. Or sometimes you read a book and you understand the world better. That's fiction. Sometimes you go to a class and you learn about something called nonfiction, which helps you understand the world better. Those aren't two different worlds. But holding all that stuff together, I think, is really hard, because, everything's structured that way, finding that nuance, but it is life. That is the reality, the process. To think of Whitehead or Bergson, we never take a snapshot of that that's gonna reflect it perfectly from all points of view. We just have to accept that. As soon as you take the snapshot, it's changed. So why can't we have all these different ways of assessing it, but just be really clear about the lineage from which we're assessing it, and really clear and careful about that assessment? I mean, I want to bring in your work with the senses, because I think this question of indoctrination and the question you asked of literal stuff, even that we have 5 senses, like, what is that? This is some assumed thing that we have 5 senses.
Yeah.
There's plenty more senses. I mean, even neuroscientists, like the most hardcore, will tell you there's nociception and proprioception and all these things, right? And then if you really want to get deep into it, you could find 20 or 30 senses. It's like a group of cells that has a particular... Anyway, we don't need to get into all that. But I guess what I'm saying is, seeing without eyes, or sensing without eyes in the way that we think of as sight, feels to me like a really interesting place to hold all this stuff together.
And it grounds it despite being so weird. And again, 5 senses is the green traffic light, and then there are more, and the mantis says, "Look at these, and look at this animal." This is this is the interesting but kind of orange traffic light, so you can still cross and you won't get a fine. But then if you say no, and there's more, there's likely other means, and maybe, and that's the weird thing, that's the spooky thing, and that maybe there's not even a channel. Like, it really goes at the basics. Let me explain this a little bit. So now it's the anniversary, because I take anniversaries as excuses, as in family life, to go for dinner, So now it's the 50th anniversary of this paper published in Nature in 1974. It was the 18th of October, which is the birthday of Bergson, by the way, the 18th of October, of 50 years ago. And this paper is by Tarkan Purov, and in it it's remarkable because it's published in Nature. I mean, one should analyze how the editor let it in and so on. And there's a soap opera behind about the new scientist journalist kind of going to the lab where this was done, and then scooping them, publishing a new scientist piece the day before the article came. So all of these things also could be used to write novels and fiction. But the point is that there are these talented people who can allegedly perceive information, and that's how we say about objects that are distantly in space and even in time, which is even weirder. They haven't happened sometimes, and they can show they can do it. I mean, you need to do the statistics, and it's not an easy thing to ask on demand. Anyways, it's another long story. Now, maybe even the idea of messenger and receiver and message and medium, maybe that also needs to be revised. I mean, to me, that's kind of true theoretical work, is to do what physicists did 100 years ago, which was kind of a craziness. Like, say, things don't add up. Well, why don't we imagine there's an antiparticle and of 3 flavors and with symmetry here, symmetry there? Of course, they weren't flippant about it. They luckily had equations, and they They were very clever people. Well, this kind of boldness, I think it's needed to rethink these processes. So also understand the lineage. This is a very important word you said, like the history. I think of this as in family constellations. I'm not sure if the viewers know what this is because, again, a scientist talking about family constellations, but I think we should constellate our scientific ancestors, It's like, oh, granddad did that. Wasn't a good thing to do, but you see, I honor what you did, but I don't need to carry that anymore. And so to understand where we're coming from, and part of this obsession with mechanism and with the senses is that we are really unable, and that goes back to Evie's first question, actually. What is perception, right? And if perception can only be like this billiard ball hitting kind of a cartoon drawing kind of lock that then closes and does the whole mechanism, if that's the only way, then of course these phenomena are impossible and unthinkable, and they just produce these allergic reactions in our Puritan intellects. It's like, oh, this, just thinking about this contaminates, because it's like Windows 95 crashing. It's like, we should upgrade this because it crashes so often, right? Now,
so you mean people can't possibly see without eyes?
No. It's no. I mean that people cannot even entertain the idea that people can see without their eyes. That's even more fascinating than like the impossible. As I'm saying this, and maybe it's true. It's too much of a spiral here. It's not so much. It's not only the phenomenon itself. It's like I do phenomenology. Let's put it this way, Andrea. I do phenomenology. It's like what it is like to be one of these dogmatic skeptics. How does it feel like? I wonder, well, it feels like that. It feels like it's like you showing dots on straight lines to somebody who doesn't know what music is, and you even singing the melody. It's like, it's unthinkable because the whole operating system and doesn't allow for anything that's not mediated by impact. And that's where materialism comes in, and that's why this idea of matter as, these regions of exclusion, and the only way this piece of matter cares about this one, and that's Whitehead's critique, right, of simple location. It's, well, they need to come together and just bang into each other, but through prehensions a la Whitehead, and this is technical, and Bergson makes it more poetic as perception as virtual action. Well, then we are truly entangled, and so it should be possible to start entertaining. How is this even possible? To give it a frame so that we can conceive that, yes, I saw it, and I've seen it with my own eyes. This guy drew on this, with this high-tech technology again, no Hadron Collider. I'm sorry, funding agencies, you won't have these billions of money scattered around your friends, but with this technology, the guy can draw an image that's in a pool of images or far away, or that hasn't been picked yet. So it's like a magic trick. When you see a magic trick and you go like, no, you say no, but it's a trick. But often reality, it's like that all the time, and probably there's no trick.
I really understand that person that you described who just can't entertain the question, because there's been times in my life when I've been that person. Even as kind of crazy a life I've lived, and I've had a lot of experiences that are definitely very hard to explain and so forth and so on. But I really know what it's like to be confronted with something you thought wasn't possible, right? And that then you kind of have to go, you just have to realize it is possible. I mean, think of like the Northern Lights or something, if you didn't know what the Northern Lights are and you just see them. Or, there's all kinds of things like this that before you understand or see them, you couldn't imagine it's possible. Then it happens. It's completely like ontological shock or whatever that term is. And then you start to understand how it happened or whatever, because you realize other people have taken it seriously and they've seen it, and you can, all these things. But I guess it just relates to me to that what I keep harping on in a way of that we think things have to fit into particular categories, and we reject ourselves or our own experience or each other when they don't fit into categories, and how to like loosen that and be a little more gentle without being sloppy or making crap up or saying there's no truth, or because those aren't the same things. Like, actually, the more you can follow the path of something and really look at it, the closer you get to truth. But like you brought up the mountain before, we can think of any landscape. There's always a million paths you can take to get any place, right? And if we both meet in the same place and try to just, and I say I came this way, and I assume you came the same way, and we describe it and it's completely different, we're going to fight. And I think that's what we do all the time. We assume we've been on the same path. We've been in completely different landscapes. We've gotten to the same place. The place looks different to us because we've had different experiences to get there. And then we just fight about what the path was like and what the place looks like, instead of learning from each other and like all this richness of learning about the other path or learning a different way to see that place. Because as we're expressing, as you express in your paper, there's so much more that could be phenomenologically experienced. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, what is that? Like, why do we judge each other so harshly and judge ourselves so harshly when we come up against something that shocks us in that way? Have you, like, you've had to come up against that, and you're working in these ways. Like, have you found a way to sit with that? And I mean, maybe it is something that needs meditation or prayer. I don't know. Yeah. What's your experience?
Let me first go back, because you're talking about the boxes and the categories, and wasn't it Deleuze who said that philosophy's job is to invent concepts?
I don't know. I've read Deleuze. I have some stuff, but I can't say.
So I like this idea of a philosopher as a craftsman, right? Somebody who's Bergson uses this other metaphor, like a tailored suit as opposed to a pret-a-porter, right? It's like, well, maybe we need to craft new. I mean, I'm not against boxes. Like, if I didn't have, we need boxes, we need categories, we need things to put into place, ideas and phenomena. But perhaps we need to build new ones. Just build new ones that fit the in that case will be the human wearing them. I often do this. This is kind of my little online experiment. Like, some data are like this, like kind of a rectangular thing, and then you just buy the rectangular frame and then you post it, and that's your data. But some of this data looks like this, and then you repeat the experiment and it looks like this. All right. And then you can do stats and you can do statistics, and you can just, press it and it's still not there. And then, okay, what do we do with this? We need another frame, another concept, So that's why theory is so important. Theory, it's not some sort of accessory furniture in the house of science, right? So then crafting new concepts that then maybe can be turned into theories, and hopefully be mathematized and testable and falsifiable and so on, and to rethink perception. And so I speak about the collecting the data, which is the pieces of paper, making frames, and then also posting them like the pins so that we can talk about them and not be stigmatized, right? But you were asking why. I mean, I think it's human nature. Probably it's fear. And Whitehead has this other quote that's so beautiful in Process and Reality, which is a book that's not famous for being understandable. But the quote says something like, "We are terrified. We crave for novelty," he says, "but we're terrified at the loss of the past," or something like this, or the familiar. So it's like, it goes back to the familiar. And my therapist speaks a lot about this, the familiar, family, right? Because the familiar is what's close, what we're used to, and so on, like these ideas. And when we get out of the familiar, you see, it's like, well, this is not familiar. You only need to travel. It's like, well, these people eat weird things, and they do it with their hands, and they do it in strange ways. It's like, so if you're in tourist mode, well, some people go and eat Burger King even when they're in Japan. But if you're in tourist mode, maybe it's just a few days and I'm back to familiar. But if you smell that maybe it's irreversible, right? Like if aliens landed tomorrow, right? There's something irreversible in our frames. It's like we cannot pretend we're not alone anymore, right? If extrasensory perception was demonstrated tomorrow, and it doesn't work like this because there's no one experiment, right? the universe is, there's no turning back. Like the universe is not how we think it was. And I can see how this is terrifying to some people. This can be terrifying. And that's where the reaction comes, right? When you're afraid as a bodily creature, you fight, you flee, or you freeze.
It can be lonely too, don't you think? That, I mean, in a way, to realize how many different ways there are, or different perspectives there are. I don't know, sometimes it can feel better to just think you're all on the same path and you're all part of the same group. I mean, I'm thinking more of my personal life, because one way I understood this early on was we had to move a lot when I was a kid. So, you're in one environment and then you're literally sort of the alien in the next environment, and everything's alien to you. And everything that was familiar or cool in one place is like not in the next, and you have to learn all that and adjust. And you just, as a kid, realize, okay, there's not one world and one right and one wrong and one cool and one uncool. And you just have to deal with it. And there's something kind of lonely about it, because you're like in that new world and everyone thinks it's the whole world, and it's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a key word,
I think it can
alien.
be a uncomfortable place.
It's uncomfortable. Alien is a key word here, because alien means extraterrestrial, but alien means immigrant sometimes, and so something you're not used to. And what kind of emotions do these evoke in us? Well, often fear and pushing it away. Back to perception and affordances, of course, the idea of affordance. And I think this is fantastic, the idea of affordance. I think electrons are affordances as well, you see? Because it's like, what's an electron? It's not like this red ping pong ball that's so small, right? It's something that's so here I'm a little bit of an enactive, again, back as an enactivist, because it's in
all this coupling
it's co-constructive. But now when it comes to affordances, there's another side of affordances that I learned by working with magicians, right? Before I started to suspect that real magic can be real, because most of the illusionists are most of the scientists, like they are convinced that real magic is fake, and that the fake magic is the real one. But when I was working with illusionists to study cognition and perception and so on, these professional magicians, I realized there's this moment. I wasn't a fan of magic, but when they were doing these tricks in front of me, there's this moment, and it phenomenologically it could be done. I don't know if somebody has studied this. There's this very brief moment in a magic trick where, before you jump in with whatever reaction you have to the surprise, to the impossible, the sense of it's a sense of the impossible, right? Like I do it to my daughters, but they don't appreciate my magic anymore. But when you go like this, you see it like here, okay, blow. Oh, it's not here, right? Okay, you go like this.
That's pretty good.
That's very good, Alex.
It's not good.
I
felt a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So then you have a moment when where the hand opens. It's like it's not an abyss. No, it's like a void. For a moment, there's something there that it's not right in its place. I don't know, Andrea, if you're a runner. I run through the mountain, and sometimes it's like you put your foot and you realize, oh no, right? And there's a moment where you're not sure where you're going to land. So in that moment, then right afterward, you start working on your affordance, and this can mean what did I perceive, but also how do I explain it rationally? Or some people don't want to explain it rationally, just enjoy it. Now, sometimes I think that for some of these people, and it's not good to talk in terms of us and them, but an ontological shock. Yeah, let's put it this way: an ontological shock is this brief sense of the impossible of the magician, which is done in a safe place because you're in a theater, and the kind of social affordance is that you're going to be tricked. You paid to be tricked, right? Everything is like in a circus where there's a net. Yeah. Now imagine stretching this so that it doesn't last half a second or a second, but that it lasts minutes, and you're not even sure this is a magic trick anymore. So I suppose that's how an ontological trick must feel like. And it's freaking scary, right?
Yeah,
Even
you
us,
described
we're
that very
talking.
well. That's a very good way to describe it, because
Yeah.
when you start to think, oh, it's not a magic trick, that's exactly the feeling where everything is, and also that where you've come down in a different place with your usual habits or bodily way of running, or it is that, and you either sit with it and learn how to do it in whatever way you're going to do that, and it becomes something like a new landscape to explore, or you kind of don't want any, or you run away, right? Or you pretend like it's not there, or
We're not so brave, as Whitehead said. We want novelty, but then, like for instance, at night, I fall asleep very quickly. But then when the lights are off, sometimes, because I'm not an experiencer, weird shit doesn't happen to me so far. And so I open my eyes and it's really dark because we have blinders in Spain because we sleep siesta, so we can just turn the entire room into, pitch black. And so I open my eyes and say, hey entities, I think, hey entities, if you're there, manifest yourself. Come on. And then I close my eyes and say, no, tomorrow. And you see, like, because what if, and of course, then my functionalist, whatever they'll say, then you don't self-induce some psychosis or something. But another example is I started having a little bit of lucid dreaming, a little bit. It only happens on Saturdays. I don't know why. And
what?
Yeah,
because it's
do you have some workout? You have some workout routine on Saturday?
No, I don't know. Maybe it's because I go to bed later, and it's not. I wish I would have them, but when they're happening at the beginning, it's not nice. You're looking. Where's the Control Alt? Where's the button to cancel the whole thing? Like when you start hearing this metallic noise in your head, like. And then you start to feel.
I loved it the first time I was lucid dreaming. I was like, "This is so cool!" Because I was flying.
When you are crossing the threshold at the beginning, like there's this noise, and then I feel that the paralysis in my body, and it's like, shit, I don't want that, right? Then maybe I never flown in dreams, but it's scary. I mean, these things are not like easy. They're not familiar.
No, I think it's very true, and this is even hard to talk about, and you just brought up mental illness too, and this like opening yourself, and because these are all, first of all, very hard to talk about with language without somebody putting it in some box, because that's understandable. But I think when you have these experiences where things are like what you just described so beautifully, where you've entered a new phenomenology, or you've entered a new ontological existence, and you don't really know if you can handle it. To me, I have had those moments, and it makes me think, gosh, there's so much more. And to talk about perception, it's almost like we're just handling what we can handle, and if we just kind of keep moving a little bit more, we're going to be able to handle. There's so much more, right? It's just we can only handle this right now.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in a like, I even think of science like that too. And all of our endeavors, that narrative you brought up, like we're trying to help each other learn how to perceive more, because there's so much more that we could perceive. And you can go crazy mystical with that. You can also become ill, because these are, if you've studied neuroscience and you've looked at the body and the brain, these are not really clear lines between all of these things. And we don't understand it all perfectly. And again, we try to say, oh, that's that mental illness, and this is imagination. But we're all treading this perceptive flow, or whatever it is. And we do have to be careful, I think, and listen to those things. At the same time that I do think, this edge work, or even just rethinking what is sensation and perception in the way that we're both trying to do in different ways, or it's opening something, it's worth doing.
Yeah. Or if you think this is kind of the every 25 minutes there's the filter announcement, like the commercial, the filter commercial. Or if we think of the brain in terms of a filter, right? Like,
transmission, filter,
well,
permission.
Yeah.
What's the?
Then it makes sense what you're saying from that point of view, because we are letting things go through. So it's more like going downhill, and really only using our brakes, right? It's like controlling how much we want to let in. It's really hard to let it all in, and we need to. We wouldn't be. Bergson says that too. We wouldn't be functional in our everyday life. Like
I don't
evolution
think so,
needs these
Yeah.
filters, because, or you can go to a great literature like Funes, El Memorioso from Borges, no? If we would
Yeah,
we would have like infinite memory, and we would remember everything we did that day when we go to bed, and then the man remembers. It takes an entire day to remember. So filtering is very important for life, to have a normal life. The question is the unfiltering. It's more like, right, how much do we let go of that? And yeah, if you do it too quickly
And as
or
you
too
say that, I
much,
think maybe science is like that a little bit, and all this indoctrination and stuff we're talking about in a wider way. Maybe there's some filtering there that's relative to all this stuff we've been talking about,
I also discovered it in Bergson. Bergson is my other, commercials that I sneak in every. But
Read Bergson. That should also be going across the screen.
yes. He was the president of the Society for Psychical Research, and I think it's probably in his opening. I think it's when they induct him, that, and then he gives a speech, and towards the end, it said something that was really kind of it healed kind of the path of science for me, because Bergson said something like, he says, if we had started from spirit rather than from matter in science, like the developmental trajectory, right? The ontogeny of these 400 years. Well, perhaps that would not have been a good idea, because then we wouldn't have gone through kind of the workout, the exercise of precision and and the mathematization of things, and accuracy and logic and all those things that we want to transcend. But we had to start from there, so that now we can approach these eerie phenomena from a solid foundation that we need to transcend it. And so when I read that, I felt, well, maybe then that's not how it's supposed to be, but okay, we can integrate. We find a place for what we've been doing over the last 400 years, so that we can continue to build upon it, as opposed to saying, all right, enough of this. Now, promissory spiritualism.
Maybe it's giving us scaffolding to be able to handle it in the same way that, maybe it's helping us develop our senses and perception collectively in a way that we can handle it without completely flipping out by how incredible the world actually is and how much we can perceive. I mean, a couple things came as you were saying all that. One is like if you do some kind of a drug, like psychedelic or something, you can't live in that space all the time, right? Or because you're not fully there. I mean, that's a kind of a false way of, we could get at it in a natural way, right? And then you kind of could deal with it. But also, as you were talking, I was thinking, we do kind of start in that weird consciousness place that I think I love so much about Bergson as kids. And then you learn language and you learn all this stuff to scaffold, and you start putting it all in order. But, when you come into the world, you've seen it with your girls, I'm sure, you're kind of in awe of everything, like the flowers. And I mean, everything is just like, whoa, it's trippy. And it's hard to live like that too, right? I mean, you can, if you get in a certain state, you go to the grocery store and it's like, look at the broccoli. It's incredible, fractal. And like, I mean, it's not really like, it's hard to live like that all the time because the world isn't living like that. But again, so maybe with Bergson too, with this matter memory and with all this hologram kind of stuff with Bohm, or all these weird people, right? That I think they're just also trying to teach us how to like be the process and look at it from different angles to be able to handle it more, right? Maybe there's something about that movement that I was trying to talk about that I feel when I read Bergson or others, that helps you begin to understand the process as you're part of it, in a way that you can handle it without it being too overwhelming, right?
I see.
A lot
I
of
see what you're saying.
yeah.
Yes. A safe psychedelic trip, but literally because psychedelics is revealing your own mind, right?
Yeah, without a substance, a psychedelic trip that is your life, you know?
Yeah, and these people come from the future. I mean, come on. I mean, and also from the past because science is an anomaly. This is the other thing that I realized recently. Because we speak as if kind of the Western mind, in particular, the scientific Western mind,
Yeah.
was kind of the default. And all these indigenous people, they dress funny. And no, science, which aspires to be universal, which means, valid everywhere, all the time, no matter what. So it's like whatever the context, which is kind of this holy grail of an equation on the wall, right? I used to love that, like, this contains it all, and whatever, forget the rest. And that's why physicists dress clumsily and so on, because like context doesn't matter. It's everything in the equation.
Yeah.
Right?
I love that too. There's something so attractive about that.
But then this is an anomaly really in the history of humanity. It's kind of a meta science. It's kind of a meta experiment on the human psyche. We don't know why we're doing it, but perhaps we'll know at some moment. Like, what was the purpose, and what did it provide to the human psyche that this happened 400 years ago, mainly in Europe, and it took over the world in many ways. But this is like that's the anomaly, because everyone has been mostly animist and except now.
Or yeah, it's one way that we've thought was the way, when there's been many other ways in many other parts of the world. I mean, we've talked about Buddhism a bit, or Taoism, or there's all these other ways where it's too cartoonish to say it, but it starts more with the consciousness or that stuff before needing, but there's scaffolding there too, to be able to handle it. Or I was thinking of that book, Dawn of Everything. Have you read it?
No.
Which kind of retells history through an Aboriginal. It's kind of like, oh, actually, we these people went to these other places and actually learned from those people how to be what we then decided was our definitive self. It's like a flipping of the usual way of thinking about how we got to be what we are. Anyway, I guess all I'm saying is, like, can we unstick it from there being like one way or this way, and realize there's been a lot of different ways, but the process, the pattern connects us, right? Whether you start with consciousness or you start with science or whatever, opposites you want to set, there's a pattern to the way we're going about it that we're trying to get. The pattern is similar, right? And who knows, like you said, who knows why we're doing this, but we really, really want to do it. We've been doing it and doing it and doing it. And there's a shared pattern, maybe. Even, I don't know if you see it, even in the old you and the new you.
What is that?
Or the way that you're looking at things in different ways. Maybe there's a pattern that's still shared.
Yeah.
The post before you had the near-death experience. And I mean, that's too simple, but even when you're in these communities that you described, which are more oriented towards a wider understanding of consciousness, or the scientific neuroscience lab, sometimes I still feel like there's patterns there that if we could find the right language, they're saying very similar things.
Yes.
Trying
humanity.
I'm an electrical engineer, but I find the stuff that's not easily modelable and observable actually a lot more interesting, like, whether consciousness is biological or not. But there's quite a bit of discussion. There was a paper that did all the summary of the remote viewing experiments that have been done, forever. It was a recent paper. I think it was last year. And these were skeptical scientists that at the end of the paper, they said that they found a statistical anomaly with people that claimed to have, this remote viewing, and they thought it may be related to emotional or intuitive intelligence as perhaps the mechanism. But what's really interesting is when the CIA first started those experiments, their first hunch was to find highly intuitive people, because they had a theory that they figured that people that are highly intuitive perhaps would be more likely to have the ability to remote view. But I get a lot of pushback from physicalists claiming that that same paper debunks remote viewing and that there is no statistical evidence. But everything I've read said there is some sort of statistical, quote, anomaly that is yet to be explained. I guess the mechanism that's causing some people to exhibit that sort of behavior.
Yes, there's a lot to be said about that. Oof.
That just opens up a whole other universe. I mean, we didn't even talk about Grinberg. I don't know if I even say his name right. And this whole, I mean, there's so much actually. And I mean, weirdly, I think if the CIA starts getting involved, there's always something there. But it ends up being that we think it's the opposite, that it's somehow fake or something. There's a weird contradiction there, but in any case, I just want to add my 2 cents, because I think Alex knows a lot more about all of this than me. And I just think there's so much really good work going on about all of this, and it is kind of kept quiet for these reasons that we've been talking about. And it would be great if there could be some kind of, I don't know, place where these people could all be named, or, like, I mean, there's actually a lot, there's like actually a whole community probably, right? And a lot of really, really substantial research, but you wouldn't be able to find it if you just look on the internet briefly. It seems like there should be some kind of very substantial cataloging of that, I guess is what I was going to say.
Well, I know most of them, luckily, and the community is still running. There are not so many compared. I joke, but it's serious. Like there are more people studying the development of the wing of the fruit fly in Spain that overall people in the world studying this phenomena. That's how unfortunate it is. Now, skeptics destroyed skepticism, and the so-called skeptics. I love it when people say these skeptical scientists, as if the other scientists we weren't, right? And they're skeptics about everything except their own doubts. I mean, it's I understand it, but it's a shame, and it makes me angry. Like it's cancel culture before there was cancel culture. There are people with like teeny imagination, and perhaps, if I may psychoanalyze them here live for free, but it's this kind of an inferiority complex that needs to show up with like kind of doubting everything. And because of there's also lack of, I would say, conceptual power of entertaining, it all has to be a statistical anomaly that sooner or later, I just threw this here, but I'll just recover it. Like, sooner or later, they'll just flatten it out. And no matter, they'll say, bring more data. But there's this joke. If you bring more data, they say, but that's still impossible in theory. So in a way, they're hopeless, but they're useful because it's true that they help raise the standards. Like, this will be a long answer, but if we speak about the history of parapsychology, what I've been able to learn and study about it and practice, many of the standards that end up going into the orthodoxy, like meta-analysis, and pre-registration and many others, they were first kind of experienced by the parapsychologists because it's like a moving bar upwards and upwards. But really, they say they would, the phrase extraordinary claims, blah, blah, blah. And they will not update their priors no matter what the evidence is, because their priors are infinitesimally small. So there's no possibility of update of belief if you bring new data. And yes, and there's some are for and others are against. And I think the reality of psi is scientifically proven. Let me say it in another way. The scientific evidence that there is for you to eat an aspirin or vaccinate, and I don't know if that would be cut because I said that word, but anyways, any medical procedure that you would take, well, that reality of telepathy and all of this weird shit has gone through the same standards. But we decide we don't believe those, but we're happy to inject whatever they tell us, right? So it's very controversial, but it's when people say it's been debunked. I mean, even that word debunking, it's a shameful word to use. So that's not to say we're done and we're finished and finito. There's a lot to do, and and then we may learn that there was a mistake here, the conceptual flaw, and then we move on. But this kind of systematic pulling the brakes and just finding any excuse, even preposterous excuses, just to not, like, it's the affordance. It's like, because it cannot be seen, then you'll just do whatever to go around it. What else can I say? I could say a lot. These things turn me on because it's so hard to do. It's so hard to do this research. Really, all research is difficult, but this one is particularly difficult. And to have all this stigma, throw all this stigma on the enigma when there's a lot of sigma, high sigma, statistical power, and then they throw the stigma on the enigma. It's a shame. That's not science. So last thing, they say this is pseudoscience. I say scientism is worse than pseudoscience because it comes from within, and everybody thinks, that's worse than pseudoscience, what these skepticals do. So here I'm making more friends.
Well, I do think that this is connected to a lot of what we were talking about, because underneath we've been talking about sort of power structures and fear and how those things can be used in different ways. And I think that's connected to this, what we've been trying to bring out, or at least, that we have, it's an either or, and then it can become very powerful to cast someone on the other side, right? Because we don't take the time to look at the full history and the story of all this stuff. So we take a little soundbite about some study, and then we just lump that person in with some other story. And we aren't even really aware of any of how it's connected, right? We are just assuming everyone's on that same path again, and that we see the place in the mountain the same way. And I think a lot of careers get ruined, a lot of lives get ruined through this. It's like real stuff, right? People trying their best for the right reasons, and then getting labeled something, and their whole path just being lumped to a path they didn't even take. And, this is like really important. And it's a reason why I do think all of this, like what we're trying to do, is important, because it's opening up nuance and nestedness, so that when you hear those kind of claims, you think, okay, it can't be that way, because nothing is all one way. So let me look into it. And I guarantee you, anything you look into, you're going to find some nuance. You might still decide it's not something that you want to be part of, but you're going to at least be able to hold the nuance, and in a different way opens up. So, I mean, again, I'm going on and on, but I just think with you, Alex, I really get passionate about it, because these are lives and these are real subjects, and they matter, and they actually do end up giving people down the road tools. I mean, even in Little World of Neuroscience, there's tons of stuff that's been debunked that people laugh at all the time, whether it's phrenology or it's the homunculus or whatever. But, if you really look into those stories, the people aren't crazy. And yes, we can say this was wrong, but there's a whole web of stuff that it led to. So yeah, I guess the point is just, I hope we can be more nuanced and realize that anytime you hear those labels, look into it, because that's what I was trying to say about these power structures. Once you start getting the labels thrown at it, look for the nuance, right?
Yeah.
Still reject it if you want to, but it's not what the label says it is, probably.
Yeah, and the flags in the prefixes, right? Pseudoscience, paranormal, supernatural, extraordinary. Like, fuck you, come on. Like, what are we? No, sorry. Like, sorry. Like, what do you? I mean, why are you using these words? And in any case,
reason, right?
And in any case, have you read shit? Have you read shit about this? Have you read this? No, you've read the celebrity skeptic on whatever media, just making fun of an old lady who's so august. Fuck you. I mean, you can just delete this later. But look, don't do this to people. This is the worst thing you can do to science, to represent it like this. Yeah. I know maths and you don't, and you're either stupid or crazy. No.
And it matters. It ends up in popular discourse, people treating each other that way, as we can all see.
And then you ask, sure. And then I start telling about my NDE, and then people come and say, I haven't told this to my family in 23 years. Why? Because they think they will laugh at them. And I'm not saying that because they had an NDE, this proves that consciousness survives bodily death, but you
it's an experience.
They haven't even told it because, and people weren't telling this to their doctors until people in Virginia and in other places started paying attention. And that's how they could, just by shutting up and listening, people could start telling them, and this opened a new field, right? So we're too quick to dismiss the experiences of people, the extraordinary experiences. This harms people and this harms science. So we all lose with that. So we should tell these skepticals to go oof themselves and shut them up. Yeah.
And just not having that whiplash kind of immediate reaction to terms. Like, ask yourself, why am I reacting so strongly to this term? Because there's a story there, and it's not a conspiracy, but it's just for your own being in the world and being okay with who you are and your own experiences. Like, you don't judge yourself by these terms just because that's the way people are telling you it is, because this was just really a painful thing to me. And weirdly, like, to your point about the literalism and the fiction and stuff, almost all of the stuff we consume in that world is about these kinds of things, right? So we're almost living two different worlds that aren't, I don't know what that is either, because obviously it's there and we care about it.
Well, look, remember I said, fact, fiction, and the imaginal. I took not the synapse image, but the importance of the imagination from Patrick Harpur, this British author, and so I think the imagination needs to dress up like fiction so that it can be tolerated by facts. You see, so that's why if you want to entertain and enjoy cool ideas, go to the cinema. Don't listen to these kind of dogmatic scientists, because they'll it's in the arts where these ideas are allowed because we believe they're fiction, right? But then turn out to be facts later. So why pretend all of that? Why can't science study the impossible as well?
Or at least let's not judge each other for it, like weirdly, not even weirdly, but a lot of scientists that I've talked to recently credit science fiction with ideas that they had that actually became literal, real things in the real, most scientific world. So this interplay is incredibly important. And I think understanding that, respecting it, opening the space a bit around it instead of naming each other one thing or another and like dismissing each other would be very helpful.
And this goes back to the contradictions and the paradoxes and like, sacrificing laboratory animals from Monday to Friday, killing them. Yeah. But then I run with my dogs on Saturday and Sunday. You see, we live through so many harsh contradictions, and some of those should be resolved, and others are create this creative tension, right? And this is another one, like all these debunkers, but then they encounter kind of the presence of their deceased loved one, and then what? Right? Yeah. Then what do we do with that? Too late.
It's something we can all connect on, but we instead hide it or feel ashamed of it, or
it's Puritanism. Yeah. It's part of the indoctrination. It's like you don't want to show your sins in public, right? So just behave as a good fellow.
But it reminds me of this weird thing, like when I was a kid, and my family was very religious, and you all go to church and pretend one thing, but then you live your life kind of in a different way. So it's pointless because everyone's doing it. So you could just all be honest and like care about each other and be living the real kind of values that you're learning about. But instead you all pretend like you're perfect. Nobody does anything wrong. And then you hide all that stuff from each other, which is weird because that's the community that could help you. I don't know. It feels like we do that a bit. And I love what you brought up about the animals, because that seems like a small thing, but if you've been in a lab, it really affects people, and you can't talk about it. You're not supposed to even say it, that it's weird.
That's why I drop it at the end, like in a good, psychotherapy session, you just drop the thing like, but it's a big topic that it's like in the shadow, like, and this is, let me say one more thing about this. And this is supposed to heal and cure all this long list of diseases and so on. Okay, how many have we actually, you see? It's like, together with the prefixes, like when all these headlines in the news are also in the future, like conditional, right? Like new molecule found that could potentially, cure Alzheimer's. All right. All right. Just continue cranking the machine. We'll talk in 20 years.
There is a lot of progress, and I am very thankful for science. But why don't we try to come up with other ways instead of killing animals to do it? Like, if we're so smart and we have all this AI, there must be other ways, right? Like, we could put money towards that too. And I mean, it's just like we don't think outside of these. We don't question and we don't talk about it, and so it doesn't change. But there could be other ways of doing this. And
I was listening to you. I felt like the two of you were talking about like intellectual growth, and there is a term called buddhi, which is it refers to the intellectual faculty and the power to form and retain concepts, reason, discern, judge, comprehend, understand. I feel like the two of you were talking about the growth of the intellect, which would actually impact like senses that you were talking about as well, or the phenomenal experience of the senses. Another term was that was interesting that I just thought I'd bring to your attention is dependent origination. As an ontological principle, it holds that all phenomena arise from other pre-existing phenomena and in turn current phenomena condition future phenomena. So those are just a couple of terms. And I love that you mentioned Evan Thompson, as he does quite a bit of work. And now for the question. Since you've done a lot of research, the both of you, I was just wondering, did you guys want to chat a little bit about a different sense that not many people talk about, proprioception, and perhaps the sense of time?
But I just first want to thank you for your answers that you gave, because I mean, I kind of have more questions about that. Like, is intellect different from perception? And we could kind of go down that rabbit hole to kind of go full circle about what is perception and how does it relate to consciousness, and is that different from cognition? But also just the second point that you brought up, I think that's kind of the most important. That's one of the most important threads for me through this conversation, is linking things together as continuous and coming out, not really beginning or ending, but linked to many other things, and finding that path, so to speak, and looking at how there are many different paths. But proprioception, I think that's what I was going to bring up, where I kind of brought up with the idea of senses with Alex, the seeing without eyes, or that I really think of proprioception as one of the five senses. I mean, one of the senses, right? Like we could say one of the 9 senses, or wherever you want to go. And again, it kind of has for me to do with what are you trying to assess and from what position. Like, I think with Alex and some of his work that I've read so far, I get the sense that there's a full body perception, that like even seeing without eyes, they're hearing, it's already kind of a proprioceptive and also fully sensory. You can't really divide into eyes and nose, and like these things don't divide in the body for me. They are already a continuous thing. You can study them differently, as we were saying, and come up with different maps and models, but that's not the process itself.
To add on what you're saying, there's something beautifully synesthetic about my experience seeing people trying to perceive this image in this apparently extrasensory way, because it's not technically what I've seen them do. It's not technically that you ask them to see them and then they kind of literally see them. They have a whiff of it, or they can feel something here, or right, or a memory comes that they link to a perception, or they hear a metallic noise and it's a plane, but at the same time they have a sense of levity in their body, right? This is fascinating, and it's like apprehension is coming a la Whitehead, and then it starts to bifurcate into rivers, and then down there we speak about the 5 main rivers. But if you go like a salmon up the river, which I think that's what they're doing, and if you read the remote viewing literature, they have technical words with what I'm trying to describe here metaphorically. They go up there and then just let the whole thing, and then they go down, and they have to go back to the brain, so they need to express it, they need to say how it feels like, because they're communicating it to you, or how it looks like, but then they go up again. It's like diving, but in reverse. And there's something about the senses merging to be able to access whatever is there and then pull it down. So that's fascinating.
I love that. It's almost like synesthesia is the kind of pool from which all the senses, we then sort of channel them into whatever way is going to be most expressive for that situation. Like,
Yeah,
there's something to that, and something to what we were saying about how much more there is to perceive and how much more the body is capable of. And
you also asked about time. Well, this is my last Bergson announcement, but and Whitehead said there's no nature at an instant. Also to make t-shirts. And this means that this abstraction of the delta t, the infinitesimal, or this idea that, where something is at time t, but time t has some width. So that's Bergsonian durée in a way, perhaps. Yeah. And so if nature needs some width because it's a process, that's no way of putting it, then maybe one can pull this chewing gum and stretch it. And some shamanic practices in Mexico and so on also have to do with extending the present. And I say Mexico because not everything comes necessarily from the East. And also this brings us into precognition, which we haven't discussed a lot, but together with this synesthetic, at least that's my experience seeing how they do it, that together with this synesthetic going up, they seem to be able to kind of stretch towards the future sometimes and bring back to the present what hasn't happened. And this is really mind-blowing. The day I saw that, it's like, all right, now I need to offer causality into the altar of scientific, casualties there. Who knows?
I think about it so much in that way that you just described too. I think about space and time, but especially time and causality. And I could go on and on, but I'll just bring up this nestedness again, a word I keep saying. Instead of thinking of linear time, something that's moving from one spot to another, there's a nestedness to it, more like a fountain or something, or the durée, I think, or there's other ways of thinking about time and about how it relates to that path metaphor that I keep bringing up that isn't really a metaphor, because space and time are continuous in the sense of whatever lived experience we're measuring from, there is no escape from it, right? Like it's kind of the nestedness that's tagging whatever you're going to try to assess. But it's the process, right? It's the thing you can never fully capture and assess, but that we try to model in so many different ways. But I just like thinking of time as like a fountain or nested, and not with this beginning in linear way. And I think that relates a lot to this perception that Alex has been trying to bring out.
There's more than one way of something existing, or maybe the philosopher should say being real. And we tend too much, and perhaps this is related to fact and fiction, because we think that there's this tendency, like things are really real if I can measure them and so on. So in their being in actuality, what Whitehead would say, they have already happened, and they've ingressed in the world, and here they are, and they're there forever. That's what happened. That's the fact, and I can measure it. But before things happen in this way, I think they live in another realm, the realm of the virtual or the potential. And quantum mechanics says that, but together with promissory spiritualism, we don't need to bet it on quantum stuff. I mean, it's very useful, but we don't need to say, sure, it's in the Schrödinger equation, let me just tilt it for you, it's here, you haven't seen it. No, we don't need to do that. But if things can exist in this virtual space, and then that's the future, or the future of possibilities, and then they need to kind of, it's like the mind getting into the body and the brain. They need to be actualized, and something has to happen. And I think that's also what's going on in these kind of experiences, that these potentials just become actualized, and they look very weird once they're actualized, because actualization is just choose one from many that were co-inhabiting this other space. And this can be spoken about mathematically, but also philosophically. So these are ways I'm trying to kind of a little bit of Bergson here, mix it with some Whitehead and what the guys did at the Stargate program. And
you mentioned Sheldrake, and that what you just said reminded me of the resonance, or this like everything is flowing into everything else, and like that's why I think of nestedness and not like linear, right? So the way that you sense and pick up on things in terms of time is happening in a nested way. That, yeah, you mentioned Sheldrake, and there's a lot in there that he's, I think, trying to express about the way we come to certain senses that doesn't fit very well with a linear sense of time.
you see, so that's fascinating. It's cool. It's juicy. This is not an ugly thing to talk about, but it's portrayed as kind of indecent and ugly sometimes. But this is fascinating, and it's aesthetically beautiful. I have an author friend of mine, and he says, well, I go to these meetings with poets, and sometimes they invite the scientists, and contrary to what we may think, nobody really wants to talk to the scientists because they're so like their metaphysics is so ugly that it's like, okay, what are you gonna tell me, right? So we need to paint a little bit the walls of the house of science too, and give it some more, like, to make it a beautiful place of ideas as well.
Yeah, a bit poetic in it rather than a bit mechanistic, isn't it?
Yeah, like this morgue, like
it is.
this gray morgue.
And just like Alex is doing, just be able to say that you're doing that. I mean, that sort of takes away you don't pretend like you're trying to fit it into a particular scientific scaffolding, but you can still think of it scientifically. I mean, you just have to be very clear about what you're doing, and because other people are going to fit it into their, reference, and you have to be clear about the reference that you are fitting it into. But yeah, I mean, it can go overboard, but something like I just think of how everyday space and time experiences can be understood this way. I mean, when I have a really crazy dream, which I do dream all the time, when I get back into bed at night, if I'm like in the same position, the dream comes back, and that's not like, that sounds very cool and mystical, but it's all of that. It's that my body is back in the position where it was. So I remember the same way if I'm listening to a podcast with Alex and Ivy walking down the street, probably if something jolts me when I'm at a particular corner, the next time I'm at that corner, I'm going to remember that podcast. It's just, there's something about space and time and the nestedness of it that we just haven't clearly seen yet because we're too concerned it's mystical, but it's just real life, everyday life.
The flesh. Yeah, the flesh.
Have you guys read the book Stalking the Wild Pendulum by any chance? By Ishtar.
What was the title?
What was the title?
Stalking the Wild Penguin?
Pendulum.
What a great title.
It's in my ever-growing list of books to buy, and people are suggesting it to me and read it, and I haven't. So now you did it again. Yeah.
Yeah, it was cited in that Stargate paper that was, I don't know where it came from, but it was in the reading list along with another title called The Iceland Papers, which was a review of various PSI studies. Thank you for this incredible room.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. It's been really amazing to listen to the two of you, and I just love the creative fervor and open mind. It's beautiful to listen to. It's both informative as it is poetic. So thank you. And I just thought of something as you were talking about the senses, just like Gestalt.
Yeah, McGillis like to use that term, Gestalt. Yeah, it's a German word.
I love Gestalt. I think it's a wonderful, I mean, we don't have time, but there's a lot of richness there. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Well, you can go for it,
Well, I can go from one more Bergson announcement.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know the famous phrase, like, well, what's the famous phrase? No, yeah, the whole is more than some of the,
of parts.
And also that, and there's that thing that I used to tell against reductionism, like you cannot split the whole into parts. But then I always felt like the sentence needed kind of a punchline to kind of make it work, because it's like, let me do another example. Yes, I can. I just did it. That's it.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Could just drop the glass.
So with Bergson, I understood how the sentence should end. You cannot split the whole into parts without the whole changing in nature, right?
I was having that thought as you were saying it. It's so true, because if I
Yes.
drop the glass, it's not the glass anymore.
Exactly.
It's
So
parts.
yes, you can vivisect a dog like Claude Bernard would do. You can study life by killing it. You can, but it's not life anymore, right? You can
Yeah,
study the
it's
mind
not
by
the
doing
dog
this.
anymore.
You can take a football and split it into, but it's not a football anymore. And well, that's what came to mind with the word Gestalt, because there's the whole, and then we don't want to, pick it into parts, and yet we do, and maybe we need to. There's another quote from Bergson that says, and yet you must learn to sew it back, or something like this, because we end up having to cut things. At some point, we need to cut the recording of these, or at some point, we need to move on to the next thing. I cut onion to cook, and maybe it's kind of the sewing back of our ideas, like this patchwork. We are told how to be great cutters as scientists and experimentalists in particular, but then nobody knows how to stitch things back together. And then comes, you mentioned a moment ago, Ian McGilchrist. So he's the ultimate stitcher. It's like, and then you can see the whole thing together. It's kind of an operation on the whole.
I always think of life almost that, we're always trying to define what is life, and in cognition, when is a machine going to be conscious and all of this. And you almost can define it by, if you can take it into parts, and if it really is mechanical and you can put it back together, it's probably not alive, right? Because, of course we can break things and we can sort of then put them back together in some way if we have the right tools and stuff, but you can't really do that with a human body. But even more, I think of Gestalt as almost like, to go back to Enactivism, I was just at this little kind of gathering with Alva Noe and Evan Thompson, who's been coming up here. And Alva Noah's latest book, he's talking about style, and there's all kinds of things to go into, but you almost can think of like a person or a personality or a style in this kind of process or gestalt or pattern. And you can't really take that away into parts, but you could maybe look at how it got to be like that, or look at how those regularities are similar to other regularities. So yeah, for me, again, it's this not confusing trying to understand something with the process that is that you can't ever actually take into parts. We could build models, and that goes back to the mechanistic and all of these kinds of things, but that isn't the process. And we confuse that so often in science and everyday life now, as we were talking about with the universities and the way they're run now.
Totally.
Yeah, it's hurting us.
It is. It's hurting our future generations as well. I see my son's turning to a computer scientist. Yeah. He's really good with his math. He's very good with his science. And then he chose to do computer science instead of something else, Yeah, it turned our kids into a machine, really. Yeah.
We have a proprioceptive problem at the civilizational level, right?
Yeah.
Like Terence McKenna would say, if we could feel what we're doing to ourselves and to the world, we would stop immediately. It's like, but we don't.
I think that's really important, what you both just said, because it sounds simple, but it's really a complex thing that we've forgotten how to be okay with the pattern and the gestalt and the process, which is life. And instead, we were so used to this mechanic thing, whether it's the university or whether it's what we're going to study or whether it's just how we sit alone in a room. We now need that mechanistic feeling. And that's just habit. That's just that we've prioritized those kind of models, and it's bled into everything. And it's now a habit that that's what we know, and that's where we feel safe. And that's really missing out on so much. And
it is.
And we know it, right? We feel it, I think.
Yeah.
But how do we express that? And I think part of it is changing the way we do science and all the stuff we've been talking about, because I think they're all very connected, and what we prioritize and habituate eventually trickles down to what our kids are doing in their rooms alone at night,
Thank you. It was a brilliant discussions. It was organic and it wasn't, my structures is just fall apart because you guys just, you know, take it
Yeah,
whatever
sorry
way
for
you
that.
want. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful and it's meaningful, really, really meaningful. Yeah, that's what we want. Really, thank
What a great dancing partner. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really fun. It worked really
Yeah,
well,
it
Alex and
was
Andrea.
really.
And Ivy, I'm sure your structure would have been really intriguing too. I wish I could see it, but I'm glad it just happened the way it did. I learned something myself, so that's always
Yeah.
the best.
Thank you for both of you joining us. It's beautiful sessions. I really, really thoroughly enjoy it. So hope to see you guys soon.
Good
All
night.
right. Good night.
Good night.
Yep.